up to about 1.8 metres. And yes, there is a lot of trimming with it, and trimming's not so bad, but it's getting the waste out of the maize causes a lot of clippings to gather up. So pretty high maintenance.
If radio doesn't work, Wallace, you can be a maize consultant by the sound.
A maize master.
Who are you? Who's your target market? Is there somebody in particular who you're going for?
Yeah.
Oh, well, we've got the Funland, as you said, and we've got an 18-hole mini golf course. We've got a miniature train track running around with a club there of 60 people in the club. So the mini trains run during the day, and we've got the mini golf in the centre. We've also got trampolines for kids to play on, and driving range as well. So
lots of things to do. Getting lost to the fun for all. Maybe Scotty, Brodie and Wallace can get down to Dunedin and get lost in a maze one day. Who knows?
Field trip.
Yeah. Field trip. Brodie, great to have you on the program. Scott, you too. I'm Wallace Chapman. See you tomorrow, 3:45. Till then.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, health officials scramble to contact 250 ex-isolation guests who need to isolate again and get COVID tests. It follows a cluster of botch-ups at an Auckland MIQ hotel, possible COVID transmission inside the facility, and a guest with the virus bundled onto a bus with other returnees. It's a betrayal of trust, according to a doctor who is now facing a double dose of isolation. Church leaders on battling COVID vaccine crazy talk. Hospital emergency departments around the country are heaving, and it's not even winter yet. The health minister is live. The undersea robots hoovering up earthquake data from the ocean floor, and art for much more than just the sake of it.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. Health officials are trying to contain any risk of a community COVID outbreak by tracking down 250 people who have left Auckland's Grand Mercure in the past 2 weeks. There is evidence of possible transmission between 2 guests at the managed isolation hotel after a woman caught the virus on day 12. The Ministry of Health is trying to contact 250 people who have left the Grand Mercure since March the 10th. And asking them to self-isolate until they get a negative test as a precaution. Epidemiologist Nick Wilson says transmission can occur from breathing in the same air in a corridor or other shared space.
Shared lift spaces, we've seen that before, shared exercise areas, and also shared smoking areas where people may be lifting up their masks to smoke.
And a woman in managed isolation at the Grand Mercure wants tougher rules to stop COVID-19 spreading. A guest who was bussed to an exercise area returned a positive result for their day 12 test while out walking, but then returned to the hotel on the same bus with all the other returnees. A woman who RNZ has agreed not to name was on the bus and says people should have been spaced out better. You can hear the full interview on Checkpoint shortly. The Supreme Court is considering whether to admit new evidence while hearing the case to overturn Peter Ellis's 13 convictions for child sex offences. The former Christchurch civic creche worker died in 2019 and his appeal is being heard posthumously. Ben Strang reports.
The Crown submitted new evidence to Peter Ellis's appeal after a complaint was made to police 2 years ago. The woman said Ellis sexually assaulted her in 1982 when she was 5 years old, a decade before the alleged abuse at the Christchurch civic creche. The complaint was never put to Ellis. Crown lawyer John Billington QC admitted the woman's complaint raises red flags. The woman didn't know Peter Ellis's identity until seeing him in a 2007 documentary, and the Crown admits the timing of that realisation could be problematic, but doesn't mean it's false. This is Ben Strang.
A 29-year-old man has been charged with murdering Auckland couple Elizabeth and Herman Bangara. The couple died from stab wounds in their Epsom home last Friday. A man who has been under police guard at Auckland Hospital faces 2 charges of murder and 1 charge of attempted murder. A bedside court hearing is scheduled for tomorrow. The head of the Simplicity KiwiSaver Fund believes it's unlikely Westpac will sell its New Zealand business. The Australian bank is looking at the future of its New Zealand business, including a possible sale or merger. Sam Stubbs says New Zealand is a cash cow for Australian-owned banks, such as Westpac, so it's more likely they will list a minority stake on the stock exchange. He says if so, Simplicity would look seriously at investing, and they wouldn't be alone.
The listing of any stake of the Aussie banks in New Zealand would be a big deal. I think most KiwiSaver funds would participate. I would think also that the NZ Super Fund and the ACC would have a pretty serious look at taking strategic stakes as well.
Sam Stubbs from the KiwiSaver scheme Simplicity. The leader of the Catholic Order, the Society of Mary, says he hasn't made a formal apology to victims of abuse because he prefers to do it face-to-face. The Society, which has about 100 members, runs 3 boarding schools around the country. Father Tim Duckworth has told the Royal Commission into Abuse and Care that while he respects others who have formally apologised to victims at the inquiry, it's not his way.
You don't break up with your girlfriend by text message. You don't tell somebody you love them for the first time by email. You know, you do it face to face. Nowadays, I suppose, with COVID and the rest of it, it might be that you have to do it on Zoom, but it's still face to face.
Father Duckworth says the Society of Mary will come under a formal Catholic apology that will be issued by the Church. The flooding crisis in New South Wales is starting to ease and officials are turning to what will be a mammoth clean-up operation. Here's the ABC's Jessica Kidd.
Floodwaters have peaked in most areas. The Clarence River remains the only major concern, with residents near Grafton forced to evacuate overnight. There's still major flooding in Moree and around North Richmond in Sydney's north, but Dean Story from the SES says the focus is now on restocking food and basic supplies.
Those resupply activities are happening by air and by sea.
The extreme rain event, which triggered the flood crisis, has passed and calmer conditions are expected over the coming week.
Jessica Kidd reporting. The Transport Minister says time will tell whether commuters take to a new Auckland-Hamilton train service. The government put more than $80 million into a 5-year trial of the Te Huia service, with another $12 million from local authorities. Speaking at the official launch today, the Minister Michael Wood says it's much more productive for workers to commute on a train.
We're taking a careful approach to this. It's been set up as a trial. We'll be continuing to monitor how the service is working, to be making sure that we're getting good value for money and that we make future investments as appropriate.
The Auckland-Hamilton train will start next month and make return trips from Frankton to Papakura twice a day during the week and once on selected Saturdays. It's 5:05. A sports medicine expert says it should be compulsory for New Zealand athletes to be vaccinated against COVID-19 if they want to compete at the Olympics. The government is offering early access to vaccination to top athletes going overseas to represent the country. Dave Gerard is an emeritus professor of sports medicine at Otago University. He believes that both the international and New Zealand Olympic committees should be taking a stronger line over vaccinations.
I go out on a bit of a limb here and say that I think we should put up a stand and say to the athletes that you need to be vaccinated or you're putting yourself and others at risk and at risk of bringing COVID back to your home country.
Meanwhile, Japan has officially started the Olympic torch relay in Fukushima, kicking off a 4-month countdown to the Tokyo Games. The Black Caps batsman Ross Taylor has been declared fit to play in the third one-day cricket international against Bangladesh in Wellington tomorrow. Taylor missed the side's first 2 wins with a hamstring strain. The European World Cup holders France have been held to a 1-1 draw by Ukraine in their opening qualifying match in the current tournament. The Netherlands began their campaign with a surprise 4-2 loss to Turkey in Istanbul. Belgium beat Wales 3-1. That's the news.
The rain ends, but Australia's floods are far from over.
They're just roofs poking out of floodwater.
A wayward cargo ship halts freight in the Suez Canal.
It's huge. It has a lot of containers on board. This is complicating rescue efforts.
And Russia's Eurovision singer hits back at harsh criticism for her feminist anthem.
Your skirt should be longer or shorter. These stereotypes makes our life so bad, and I'm tired of it.
Worldwide Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Coromandel Peninsula mainly fine, isolated showers developing today. Auckland to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty, Central High Country and Wairarapa, mainly fine, isolated showers developing later tomorrow about and north of Taihape. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay cloudy with 1 or 2 showers, clearing to fine weather tomorrow. Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough increasing fine spells, isolated showers about the ranges today. Westland and Fiordland cloud increasing this evening, a few showers tomorrow. Canterbury and coastal Otago areas of low cloud, mainly evening and morning, otherwise fine. For the remainder of Otago and Southland, fine weather, high cloud increasing tomorrow. Chatham Islands mostly cloudy tonight with the odd shower, fine spells increasing tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 8.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It's a betrayal of trust. That's how one returnee is describing a series of apparent failures at an Auckland MIQ facility. Health officials are scrambling to contact 250 returnees who've left the Grand McCure Hotel after COVID appears to have spread between guests in the isolation facility. Genome sequencing shows a link between 2 returnees infected with the UK strain of the virus. They were staying in separate rooms on different floors and arrived on separate flights 2 days apart. Returnees who've left the hotel since March 10th are now being ordered to stay home and immediately get a COVID test. The link was uncovered following another botch-up. A guest who was bused to an exercise area away from the hotel returned a positive day 12 COVID test result while out walking, but was still loaded back on the bus with other returnees. The guest had been on another exercise bus 2 days earlier. That's meant 23 other returnees have had their isolation stays extended by up to an extra 14 days. Among them is a doctor who is deeply concerned about what she sees as sloppy, potentially dangerous protocols in MIQ.
It's disappointing. It's a betrayal of trust. And every New Zealander should feel very unhappy about that. I don't know how it's happened. I thought that we were within a bubble, that this was bigger than a level 4 lockdown. Everyone is assumed to have COVID until proven up otherwise. And obviously some of us have a higher risk of that than others. And I thought the risk was stratified, that we would be walked within with people within our zone, our own bubble.
Okay, so it turns out that that wasn't the case. And it actually turns out that someone who was on the bus with you tested positive for COVID. We now know, because Ashley Bloomfield has confirmed this, that they found out about the positive test while you were out on the walk, right? You bussed to the location, you were walking. What happened on the way back?
After the walk, we were just put back in the bus, but everyone was in different seats. So unfortunately, instead of everyone being in the same seat they were on the way there, we were all mixed, and hence we all became close contacts.
And you were not told anything about the positive test?
Not until we got back. When we arrived, as we got off the bus, there was a number of people waiting for the bus, and they immediately corralled the workers who had taken us to the site and pulled them over to one side. When I got to my room, which was only a couple of minutes later because I was the first one off the bus, my phone was ringing, but as I was nervous, I did a full strip, clean down, shower, wash the hair, the whole thing you're meant to do if you feel that you've been potentially exposed. And then when I got out of the shower, the phone was ringing again. And at that point, the wellbeing team were informing that unfortunately the positive test had come back whilst we were out on the walk, and that we would be staying for at least another 5 days, which felt quite awful because it was obvious that they had the result and had not decided to reduce the risk by taking the poor person away and bringing us back separately in a clean bus so that they could half our exposure. And they had that time to actually make the decision about what they were going to do with us. And that is very disappointing because they could have mitigated the risk.
How would you describe that decision? The decision to allow that person back on the bus with you?
It's a complete betrayal of trust. It's a betrayal of trust not just to the people who were on that bus, but also to every New Zealander. We trust that our border will keep the virus out of our country. We have an elimination strategy, and we trust that the procedures are good enough to prevent that, and it does not feel like that is happening.
You have now subsequently been told you're in there for an extra 14 days, isn't that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so that means you are classified as a close contact, one assumes?
That is correct.
Was there no social distancing on the bus?
They did have a row between each guest, but they did not have a checkerboard pattern, which I understand from Auckland Public Health is what should have been happening, which means that we weren't 2 metres, we were more like 1.2, 1.3 metres away from the next person, but also the fact that we weren't in the same seating pattern there and back with no seating plan kept has meant that we've all had to be classified as close contacts because they cannot rule out who was not a close contact.
So what did Public Health tell you when they called you to lay out what the situation was? What did they say about the seating arrangement and, well, this botch-up?
They were unhappy. They were disappointed that the distancing was not maintained, that the bus was sounded like it was overcrowded, and that the people were not in the same seats on the way there and the way back. It makes their contact tracing very, very difficult, and obviously increases the risk of everyone who's come into increases the number of people who have come into contact directly with the case.
What did they say to you about the breach and its seriousness?
The doctor that spoke to me said that it was the most serious one that she had dealt with in the whole of this time, and she was very disappointed, and she was very apologetic that it had happened to me. And I'm sure she said that to every single person that she talked to.
Do you feel safe at that hotel?
The people who are working here are amazing, but the system is letting us down, and the things need to change immediately. They cannot use those buses to take people out to the site. It is too dangerous. And certainly they need to make sure that they do keep the different risk profile people separated, and that is not happening, and it's disappointing.
There is now a further investigation underway because it appears that guests have transmitted the virus while in managed isolation. So it's a facility set up to keep people safe and separated from the spread of the virus, and it seems that at the isolation facility the virus has spread. It's the UK virus. How concerned are you about that latest development?
Yep. Well, number one, I was extremely disappointed to learn about that by reading it online in a newspaper article, and not to be informed directly when I'm one of the people who is most directly affected. To learn that it's the UK variant and not to be told that by the authorities is disappointing. It just feels that you're not being treated with respect. It is terrifying that it is the most transmissible variant. It doesn't surprise me that it has been transmitted. It is one of those most tricky variants that leaks very easily. But one thing that did concern me, I know that, and I'm not trying to be funny about anything or compare and contrast, I know that in different areas within New Zealand they haven't had transmission. And I understand that in those facilities, maybe you're not allowed to touch lift buttons. There's a lot more strictness about the bubbles, and a lot more strictness about making sure people leave their masks in place and don't bring them down to actually talk on the phone when they're outside of the room.
Are people doing that in the facility that you're in, lowering their masks to chat on the phone when they're in common areas?
I have seen that on the bus. You'd look across and you think, oh my God, they've pulled their mask down a little bit to actually make themselves heard while they're on the phone, and it's terrifying.
So you have written to the Director General of Health expressing some serious concerns about the way things are being managed, but you are also asking him about the vaccine. What do you want to happen now? So
I felt that there is some evidence that giving the vaccine in the prodrome after exposure and in the early parts of illness can give advantage to a person, because they may start to mount an immune response before the virus takes hold. The evidence is not strong yet, but it is there. But on top of that, it actually gives hope to us, because at the moment we feel disregarded, unprotected, and by giving us the opportunity to take the vaccine, if you wish to take it, it may improve your immune response in the early disease, therefore hopefully preventing you developing serious life-altering or threatening disease. Anything that is offered as hope helps to reduce your cortisol response, and when your cortisol response is reduced by that empathy and by that giving of hope, your immune response improves. So I just hope that we can get that to happen, because I think it's an olive branch that can be offered. I know there are 300,000 doses sitting within New Zealand somewhere, and I know that means that a number of us are jumping the queue. But I feel that in this situation it's warranted, especially when the government are now moving to allowing people to jump the queue for compassionate reasons for travel, and also for sports people when they're going to represent New Zealand overseas. It would only be another 22 doses, as there are 2 of the people who are affected who are under the age of 5. And because of the nature of my work and my age, I would have been next in line. So it's only going to be 22 doses maximum that would be ahead of the queue. And I don't have a problem with any people working within the system, but the system has failed us, and the ministry can actually do things to actually start rebuilding our confidence and our trust by giving us some kind of offering to try and help us with our immune response against this virus if we do become infected.
And that's a doctor who is in managed isolation at the Grand MIQ. She says she hasn't heard back from the Director General of Health. She wrote to him raising her concerns. Now, we invited the Ministry of Health on to address some of the concerns that she raised, but they declined. MB, the ministry responsible for MIQ, didn't respond to our request, and the COVID response minister was also unavailable to appear on the program. But he told our political editor, Jane Patterson, he's taking very seriously a case of possible transmission within the Grand MIQ. 250 people who have already left managed isolation have been asked to isolate and get tested. That's after a person tested positive for the virus on day 12 of their stay. Chris Hipkins says they're working hard to ascertain exactly what's happened and says there's no chance of community transmission at the moment.
The one thing that we're doing, just to be absolutely certain of that, is going back and testing people who have left the Grand MIQ facility during the time period that those two cases were there. And that's just a very precautionary measure. It just means that if for any reason they have been incubating the virus, we'll pick that up.
Is there a chance, though, that they could have had contact with any of those people who have departed?
Relatively low risk, given what we understand about their movements, but we always want to be on the side of caution when it comes to these things, which is why we are asking those people who've left just to get another test and make sure, it's now 5 or 6 days since the last possible exposure event, so providing their tests come back negative, we should be feeling reasonably confident at that point. But we're just doing this out of an abundance of caution.
And that's the COVID-19 Response Minister, Chris Hipkins. It is 5:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Hospitals across the country have reached crisis point with several EDs at capacity. People are being treated in corridors, increasing numbers of staff are reporting burnout, and wait times are becoming longer. In the past 48 hours, Dunedin Hospital and Whangarei Hospital have reached capacity, asking people to keep emergency departments for emergencies only. Now, medical practitioners across the country say it is a nationwide problem, and without support, it's only going to get worse. Tess Brunton has more.
Patients are stuck. They're in corridors. They're spending 6, 8, 12 hours in the emergency department where we're forced to try and provide them longitudinal care.
That's Dr. John Bonning, the president of the Australasian College for Emergency Medicine. He says the emergency department is where the stress is most visible, but the whole system is under increasing pressure.
So it's about the sickest and most injured patients not being able to be admitted to the ward and us trying to look after them whilst we wait for those ward beds to become available.
He says it's easier to outline the hospitals that don't have a major problem than to name the ones who do.
Virtually everyone I have spoken to has issues with this. We've had the busiest January and February on record. They're the busiest months ever. It's that build-up. Palmerston North Hospital last year put patients into public corridors. Capital Coast, Wellington hospitals had massive capacity issues. It really is a problem in Auckland and the hospitals up there. Middlemore seeing lots and lots of patients, the busiest hospital in the country, and backlog.
College of Emergency Nurses chairperson Sue Stebbings says the crisis point has been building for years.
Some of the main challenges are for nurses continuing to manage with increased numbers of patients presenting, and while they're working with short staffing, sometimes the space isn't available, so corridor spaces are being used in many departments. There's not enough staff to open up the new areas where new departments have been built.
She says emergency nurses are often battling a constant fatigue from the increased demands. New Zealand Medical Association Chair Dr. Kate Baddick says the issue doesn't start with emergency departments. That's just where it's most visible. She says GPs are being overwhelmed with not enough support, increased workload, not enough doctors and more patients. That leads more people to go to EDs as they face waiting times of up to 4 weeks.
So we've got a chronic problem exacerbated by an acute problem related to getting enough doctors both within and without hospitals, and then we've got people delaying being seen because of COVID and associated issues around access. You've ended up with the tsunami of patients needing to be seen.
She wants the government to free the stream of international doctors coming in to Aotearoa. Dunedin Hospital declared a code black yesterday after reaching capacity. At one point, 18 patients were stuck in the emergency department awaiting a bed, with only 3 available in the wards. The Southern DHB's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Nigel Miller, says there is sufficient capacity in the wards to receive patients now. Capital and Coast DHB says Wellington Hospital has an ED that's too small to meet the increasing acute demand, and there's not enough inpatient beds across the hospital. Waitemata DHB has considerable congestion in both North Shore and Waitakere hospitals, and today Whangarei Hospital put out a call for people to stay away from the ED unless it was an emergency. The department was at capacity. On Tuesday and Wednesday, 246 people arrived at the ED. On the same days last year, there were 138 patients. Mark McGinley is the manager of Northland DHB's Surgical and Support Services. He says many hospital beds are full, and that's having an impact on inpatient admissions.
The demand is high. It's not unprecedented, but when you have repeated periods of high demand, it then can lock the whole system up and can make that flow difficult.
Dr. John Bonning is meeting with Health Minister Andrew Little tomorrow to call for more support for a system under mounting pressure. Without support, he says they're at a crisis point with a harsh winter on the way. For Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, Tane.
Keen for your feedback on that one. Have you been to a hospital emergency department recently? What was your experience? Or are you a worker in an ED? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Also keen to hear from you if you're isolating at the MIQ Hotel and if you were on that bus the other day with the person who turned out to be infected with COVID-19. Text 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The New Zealand Olympic Committee is being urged to make it compulsory for athletes going to the Tokyo Games to be vaccinated against COVID-19. The government is offering early access to vaccination to top athletes travelling overseas to represent New Zealand. Former New Zealand team doctor Dave Gerard says Olympic officials need to take a stronger line. Sports editor Stephen Hewson reports.
While New Zealand athletes can get priority for their COVID jab, the International Olympic Committee is refusing to make it compulsory for those heading to Tokyo. The NZOC is taking the same line, saying it's up to each individual athlete. Sports medicine professor Dave Gerard says with 10,500 athletes from more than 200 countries in a confined space like the Athletes' Village, it makes sense to be vaccinated.
I go out on a bit of a limb here and say that I think we should put up a stand and say to the athletes that you need to be vaccinated or you're putting yourself and others at risk and at risk of bringing COVID back to your home country.
Professor Gerard says the medical staff for New Zealand's Olympic team have been doing a lot of work with athletes around the vaccine.
Dr. Bruce Hamilton, who's the medical lead, has done a huge amount of work in dispelling some of the myths and answering the questions that the athletes pose to him. And I've had a few questions posed to me about the safety of the vaccine, whether it might affect an athlete in training. Well, the truth of the matter is none of these things will impact upon an athlete's performance.
Despite Professor Gerard's recommendation, the NZOC is adamant it won't be forcing athletes to get vaccinated. In a statement to RNZ, it said it will strongly encourage athletes to get the vaccine as it will give them peace of mind. Canoe slalom competitor Luca Jones could be heading to COVID-19 hotspots in Europe prior to the Games for World Cup events. Jones says uncertainty around a third wave of COVID-19 hitting the likes of the Czech Republic and Germany have stopped her from heading overseas.
We're really fortunate to be able to receive the vaccine before going to Tokyo because I know a lot of countries won't be able to, or a lot of athletes from different countries. So, yeah, it's kind of a huge weight off our mind to know that, we're safeguarded.
Paraswimmer Sophie Pascoe, who's won 9 gold medals over the past 3 Paralympic Games, says the ability for athletes to be vaccinated early is a big relief.
Definitely gives you a little bit of a confident boost knowing that you are going into a village with, 10,000 people. It's spreading worldwide and we can't control that, and we are in a place of uncertainty, but the vaccine makes you obviously feel like you have at least a little bit of certainty.
The Black Caps are also set to get priority for vaccination, with the New Zealand cricket side heading to England in May to play England in a Test series, then India in the final of the Test Championship. But veteran player Ross Taylor's undecided as to whether he'll get vaccinated.
It's a personal decision for everybody. I think you've got to get all the facts and things first and foremost. I haven't discussed it with anyone, but it's up to the individual to make that decision, and I haven't come up with my decision yet because I haven't really thought about it. I've been more worried about my hammy at the moment, unfortunately.
However, not getting vaccinated is simply too risky, according to sailing coach and former Olympian Jo Ellis, who'll be going to the Tokyo Olympics with her NACRA 17 sailors.
The likelihood if someone tests positive, your team could be out, you could be out, and close contacts could be the entire team. It's just such a risk. So, anything we can do to look after the health of the athletes, the coaches, the support, and also the performances, we will do.
All up, about 500 to 600 athletes from a variety of sporting codes are expected to seek early vaccination so they can compete overseas. For Checkpoint, Stephen Hewson.
Sold to another bank listed on the New Zealand Stock Exchange or winding down the business completely. Speculation is rife over what will happen if Westpac decides to withdraw from its New Zealand operation. But experts say it's too profitable here for the bank for it to completely withdraw, and it's likely a minority stake will be listed on the NZX. Sally Murphy reports.
It's the country's third largest bank, with around 1.3 million customers and an estimated 20% market share. Massey University Business School Associate Professor Claire Matthews says other international banks could look at increasing their presence in New Zealand by buying Westpac. But she doesn't think there'll be any interest from New Zealand banks.
ANZ's already got quite a significant market share. I can't see that BNZ or its parent NAB wants a bigger presence in New Zealand. I might be wrong. Kiwi Bank might be interested in growing, and this would be a good way of doing it, but I don't believe that they would have access to the capital.
She says a consortium of interested parties could combine funds to buy the bank.
One of the issues you've got with a consortium is that then you've got different parties who possibly have slightly different objectives in terms of what they're doing, and so the direction for the bank going forward could be challenging if they have slightly different perspectives, because they might start out when they go into the consortium that this is what we're going to do, but over time their views change and the direction changes.
Ms Matthews says Westpac could struggle to find a buyer, like when National Bank did when it went on the market 20 years ago. If that's the case, then there are options.
One of the options is to simply wind down the business. So over time, cease taking deposits, cease lending, encourage borrowers to repay. I mean, that would take time. They could look just to sell their loan book, then just give their depositors their money back. So there are things they could do if they wanted to do that, but it wouldn't be an instant answer.
Simplicity KiwiSaver Scheme Chief Executive Sam Stubbs says New Zealand is a cash cow for Australian-owned banks like Westpac, so it's unlikely they'll sell the whole operation.
I think it would be a very surprising strategic decision if they decided to exit New Zealand completely. I think they'll want to stay here, they'll want to stay in control of their operations. But I think this is a very clear message that what the banks are now actively looking at doing is selling down at least a minority stake in their operations to shore up their capital and make sure that they can carry on banking in New Zealand for a long time.
Mr Stubbs says if Westpac put a minority stake on the NZX, Simplicity would seriously look to invest.
The listing of any stake of the Aussie banks in New Zealand would be a big deal. I think most KiwiSaver funds would participate. I would think also that the NZ Super Fund and the ACC would have a pretty serious look at taking strategic stakes as well.
Greg Smith from the market research company Fat Profits says as well as interest from funds, it would be a solid investment for mum and dad investors.
There'll be a wide public appetite for the shares, obviously fairly stable cash flows, good dividends and the like. So I think, compared to a few of some of the niche offerings in more recent times, I think, Westpac, obviously a very well recognised brand. A lot of people bank with Westpac. I think it'd be well received by the wider investing public.
Westpac has hired advisors to review its New Zealand operation and said it's in the very early stages and no decisions have been made yet. For Checkpoint, Sally Murphy.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, hospital emergency departments are swamped and stressed staff are leaving. What's the solution? The Health Minister is live. The Undersea robots hoovering earthquake data off the ocean floor, and the art of expansion, a studio specialising in art therapy, goes big and bold. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. You can text us 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or there's always email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now with Susanna.
Health officials are tracking down 250 returnees who stayed in Auckland's Grand MIQ hotel in the past 2 weeks to contain any risk of a community COVID outbreak. There is evidence of possible transmission between 2 guests at the managed isolation hotel after a woman tested positive for the virus on day 12. And a doctor at the Grand MIQ has told Checkpoint the situation was a betrayal of trust and tougher rules are needed to stop the virus spreading. She was among a group bussed to an exercise area with the returnee who returned a positive result while out walking, but then went back on the same bus. She says it was a serious breach of standards. A man has been charged with murdering Auckland couple who died from stab wounds in their Epsom home last Friday. The 29-year-old man has since been under police guard at Auckland Hospital and faces 2 charges of murder and 1 charge of attempted murder. A bedside court hearing is scheduled for tomorrow. A lawyer representing Peter Ellis says evidence from a new complainant is too inconsistent to allow it to be heard. The former Christchurch civic creche worker died in 2019, but his appeal against 13 child sex convictions is being heard posthumously. The Supreme Court is considering whether to admit evidence from another complainant who says she was raped by Ellis as a child 10 years before the civic creche case. But Ellis's lawyer, Rob Harrison, has told the court the woman's story has too many contradictions to be credible. The Transport Minister Michael Wood says the new Auckland-Hamilton train service launched today is a much more productive way for workers to commute. The government has put more than $80 million into the Te Huia service and local authorities another $12 million. The Auckland-Hamilton train starts next month with return trips from Frankton to Papakura twice a day during the week and once on selected Saturdays. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō, ko Lisa Owen Takawingwa, and this is Checkpoint. It is time now for the business news with Nicholas Poynton. 2 degrees, right? So the cell phone providers company, they're thinking about going public, are they?
Yeah, the majority owners of 2 degrees, the US-based firm Trilogy International, says it's considering selling its 72% stake in the firm and float its shares on the New Zealand and the Australian Stock Exchange. It says market conditions at the moment are incredibly favourable, and by that they're sort of speaking to the strength we've seen in share markets around the world, also the strength of our dollar, and importantly they say there's quite an appetite for telco firms around the world, and a lot of that's maybe speaking to sort of the demand or the need to be connected during this COVID environment with lockdowns and things like that. The services that telcos offer have never been so important. Going public, Trilogy says it will help Trilogy pay down its debt, of which it has a lot, and help fund 2 degrees future growth. And 2 degrees, it's come a long way from its inception. It has about 1.6 million users on its mobile network, about 130,000 broadband customers. It's been growing its sort of presence in the business space as well. But it does remain the 3rd largest telco in the market behind Spark and Vodafone. And it has been loss-making for most of its history until its maiden profit back in 2017. Now, the most recent figures that Trilogy's put out in its earnings point to sort of continued growth for the company. But I think one of the important things about to consider with this company sort of weighing up a potential listing is it needs to look at ways to get capital into its business, because that really is a necessity, because with a cash-strapped owner and the looming pressures of having to ramp up investment in things like 5G, as well as the ongoing need to invest in your infrastructure, things like lines and things like that, they always need improvements. The company is going to need cash, and this is why it hasn't come as too much of a surprise that this company is thinking about this option for some of the analysts that we've been speaking to. The company's yet to appoint a lead manager. That's usually an investment bank that goes out and sort of gauges the interests of institutional investors to see if they want to snap up a piece of this company. But that's going to take some time. You know, the indication that the company's given us is that if they do list, it will be in the second half of the year.
Okay, you got warehouse results, and they're going gangbusters, aren't they?
Yeah, look, it's a company that's really exceeded expectations in light of the pandemic. Its half-year profit up by 88% on last year to $55 million, but that's taking into account sort of the one-off costs associated with paying off the wage subsidy, about close to $68 million, and also the costs associated with that major restructure that it underwent last year, a hugely controversial restructure as well. But if you account for those one-off costs, its half-year profit almost tripled on last year. The company's put a lot of that down to the fact that people aren't going overseas, they're redirecting that spending locally, and it has a lot to offer. Remember, the warehouse group, it includes not just the big red sheds, but also the warehouse stationery, Noel Leeming, Torpedo 7, and also the online retailer, The Market. So depending on if you want a new TV or a bike, this is a company that has that to sell to you. It's also managed to really grow its presence in the online space, and that's really helped during these sort of snap lockdowns we've seen. They say online sales now have increased by half on last year, and they now account for about 12% of its total sales, and they think there's actually even room for more growth in this space as well. Now, the company's chief executive, he says this result really speaks to its ability to adapt. A lot of those cost-cutting measures that it's taken are now flowing through. The group did not provide the market with an update, they say, about what its full-year forecast will look like. They say there's still a degree of uncertainty. They note that
these companies, sorry, Nicholas, but these companies, I mean, you were reporting on, was it Briscoe's the other day?
Yeah.
These companies are faced with a very unique set of circumstances, like people trapped in their homes for various sectors of the year, probably driven to boredom, and the internet was the only way they could make purchases, including sort of cake tins and everything else. And presumably, as we get vaccinated, those circumstances hopefully won't reoccur.
Yeah, it's one thing, are you referring to the online sales?
Yeah,
there?
And whether they can count on it still being like that.
Well, in the interview we did with Nick Grayston today, one of the points he made is that online sales in New Zealand versus other markets in the OECD are actually comparatively low. So it's on that basis which they think there will be further growth. And as younger people getting older, more and more of them are buying their own things. Buying things online is just going to become natural. So that's something they're probably also banking on as well. But one of the things I mentioned when we talked about a preview this week was those issues around inventory levels. And they say they've managed to sort of avoid most of that. But one isolated issue they're seeing is with whiteware. That's right. For whatever reason, that's something they're struggling to get their hands on, something that they're looking to manage. But they also mentioned the recent snap lockdown in February. That's likely to flow through and impact its full-year profit because they haven't seen the same bounce back that they saw in the lockdown we saw in August. And in our interview with the chief executive, we asked him about that controversial restructure last year. If you remember, everyone will probably remember, they got blasted by the PM, blasted by the media, and blasted by the unions. And the question we put to him is, do you have any regrets about that process? And he says, look, that restructure, it was signalled to the market well before COVID-19 hit. He said if he did have a regret, it was the fact that they couldn't announce that in person. They had a plan to get 900 people in one place and make that announcement, but because of the pandemic, they had to do it digitally.
Yeah. Okay, so what numbers have the market thrown up today?
Well, the NZX is up about 29 points to 12,388. The dollar's at 69.8 US cents, 92.6 Australian, and I mentioned the warehouse group. On the back of today's announcement and the fact it's also going to be resuming dividends, its share price is up 3.5% or 13 cents to $3.78.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with Business News there. For most, COVID-19 lockdowns are anything but a pretty picture. But an Auckland art studio has taken them as a chance to draw up ambitious expansion plans. Mapura Studios specialises in art therapy and bringing people living with the effects of stroke and other disabilities together. Auckland's 4 lockdowns forced Mapura out of its lively studio and online. But with that came an epiphany. It could help more New Zealanders to discover their artistic side. Our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Munro spent a morning with some of Mapura's finest painters.
They're so gorgeous. Did you just do it off the top of your head? Yeah, it's really amazing. Yeah, I really love it. Another beautiful Alison Hamlet painting.
Please try to understand my voice. A sign painted in hot pink on the wall. We're in Mapura Studios, tucked away in suburban Auckland. This is the stroke class where people can come and express themselves through art.
I was delighted to know that this place existed where you could come and make art with people in the same situation, and the collaborative inspiration here is really conducive to painting and drawing. It's fantastic.
This is Kerry, who was a lawyer for 35 years until he wasn't. An accident during surgery means he cannot use his left side and walking is very difficult. Kerry tells me his old life as a lawyer has gone. Now he's a painter and a poet.
When you're working as a lawyer, although it's creative in the sense that you're creating solutions to disputes and problems and trying to broker good deals and agreements, it bears no relationship to this type of creativity. This is entirely different. This is something you do for absolute pleasure. And it'd be hard to say you practice law for pleasure.
He says painting feeds his soul.
I firmly believe we have a separate brain, which I call Brian by transposing the vowels in the middle. So Brian has his way quite often, and end up by painting a crocodile, for example, which...
Sometimes Brian takes over.
Brian does take over. Yes, he needs to be put in his place sometimes.
Sitting across from Kerry is Natalie, a concert pianist in Georgia. She's lucky to be here at all. She still plays a little, but only with one hand.
After the stroke, I lost all abilities for walking, as well for walking, because I had a very severe stroke. Left side, the hand and the fingers totally gone, and the whole body, as well with memory. And of course, like after the severe stroke, the doctors gave me anyway only 2% to survive. But operation went very successfully, and I had a very brilliant surgeon, and they saved my life. But of course, to dream again, to continue my career like a concert pianist and classical pianist, that wasn't possible.
Victor was a school teacher. Mapura is where he finds purpose.
Mapura, I've been here about 2 years, and I've been painting since college days. But I've left it until I came to Mapura. It sort of awakened everything here, because it gave me time. You see, I don't have time for, day-to-day living, all the responsibilities, home responsibilities, domestic and everything else. It sweeps you away. So this is a kind of sanctuary.
Guy used to work as a barista, but living with the effects of stroke has led him down a different, more colourful path. He pictures himself in his painting. He's at home in the Thai countryside, meandering through lush fields towards the sunset.
They want to bring back my memory where I live.
For Guy, painting is a second language he learnt here at Mapura Studios.
I love it. Something I bring from inside. What I see, what my something collection inside. I want to tell, and that's become to the brush and the pen and something I pick up and from my memory.
Ken lost the use of his right arm and can no longer walk. He used to be a weather forecaster, and today he's busy drawing a scene from the recent tsunami warning.
Come here because there's not much offered in Auckland, which is only 1.5 million people, but really there's nothing for stroke people, and it's really quite shocking.
For these people, Mapura is everything. But when lockdown came, things had to change. Director Diana McPherson says classes shifted from Mapura's lively, paint-splattered Folds Park studio to the computer screen.
The biggest issue we found was that people wanted to engage, but they couldn't always do that. They didn't necessarily have the technology at home or the devices. Or the other thing was that many of them generally had support at home and under normal times, but that support wasn't there during COVID because in level 4 lockdown there just wasn't allowed. You know, you had to be in your little bubble. And so the people that were coming in to help weren't there, so they didn't have the ability to actually get online themselves without somebody to help them.
But the problem of lockdown became an opportunity with the idea to offer classes around the country. Mapura secured Ministry of Social Development funding after Auckland's first lockdown so it could expand online classes to regional New Zealand. Diana McPherson says these people have lost the lives they knew. They come here to put them back together.
I'd never really had much to do with disability personally, and I was a little bit frightened when I first came. But they're amazing and wonderful people, and they're so generous. They're incredible.
Combination of watercolour, the wash, and the chalk, it's just really lovely.
Board member John Ferris volunteers in painting classes and says Mapura has big plans for expansion.
The Ministry of Culture and Heritage have announced it's called the Care Fund, and we'll be applying for that to roll out the stroke class and the stroke art therapy class, and this is the stroke class, throughout the country, so we can offer this kind of class around New Zealand, which would be brilliant. It'd be a great way to use that fund and that resource, you know, because stroke is a major form of disability in the country, and a lot of people, once they've had the stroke and been through the hospital, they're then forgotten. But to offer this, and as you guys have seen, the artists are getting a hell of a lot out of it, and they're doing such great work. So it's not only the creative side, but also the therapeutic side, the helpful side. I think it'd be wonderful to offer that to the whole country. This is a drawing of a fly with yellow feet because a fly landed in the yellow paint I used at Mapura once and left yellow footprints everywhere, plus he flew around with yellow shoes on his feet.
Studio coordinator Sasha Kronfeld is here at Mapura every day. She says it's a place to create art without judgment.
Everything here that you come is often about a personal reflection of who you are, and that's kind of amazing to be around.
Diana McPherson says art therapy at Mapura Studios is for everyone. The young, the old, the disabled, or just those dealing with grief and anxiety.
People that come here, they find a place that they don't find anywhere else. We don't tell them what to do, we don't tell them how to do it. We just help them be themselves.
With online classes for the deaf coming soon and dance and music groups to follow, even those who aren't here can find their inner artist. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
And if you were listening to that story on radio from Nick Trubridge, Nick Munro and our producer Bridget Burke, if you watch one video, please watch that one. We'll put it up on our Facebook page. It is 10 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. After 6 tonight, we'll speak to Health Minister Andrew Little about what's going on at the country's overwhelmed emergency departments. Members of New Zealand's Pacific communities are emphasising the importance of clear messaging about the COVID-19 vaccine. The country's rollout of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine is still in its early stages. But according to the government, the new tranche of vaccinations will focus on non-border frontline workers and those living in what are considered high-risk settings. This includes many Pacific people, among whom there is some hesitancy about vaccination, as Johnny Blades reports.
Churches are playing a big part in linking health authorities and the Pacific community during the pandemic. The Methodist Church of New Zealand, with its large Pacifica congregations, has been sharing clear information about vaccination and how it can protect the community. Its General Secretary, Tara Tautare, says church members have questions about the vaccine's safety and who is getting it and when.
We are aware
that there are some diverse opinions within the church as to whether or not people should be vaccinated or not. But we as church are saying that we see vaccinations as an ethical choice for the common good of all people, especially vaccinations for COVID.
She says they're having to battle incorrect information shared online.
Social media platforms are often loudspeakers for kind of crazy talk at times. But I think as church leaders, all we can do is really promote reasoned conversation and discussion about the issues that are concerning people, and then point people to trusted sources of information.
The head of New Zealand's Immunisation Advisory Centre, Dr. Nikki Turner, says misinformation or disinformation on social media means it's important people talk to those they trust, people who understand the vaccination process. But in some places, mistrust of government can be a challenge.
I think when you have a community with a health sector and a system and a governance that works well, we trust it. And we see that around the world with countries which are well run and their health systems are run well. There's a level of trust that the decisions are being made to look after their community. We see elsewhere in the world where the health sectors are not working well, there's mistrust, maybe people feel there's corruption at the government level, then people are not going to trust the decisions.
In 2018, Samoa's government suspended measles vaccinations after the death of 2 toddlers following a mishandled jab. An investigation found it was human error by nurses, but the suspension of the program led to holes in the numbers vaccinated. And in late 2019, an outbreak of measles killed 83 people, mostly children, in a few short months. Afamasanga Asemanga Taele Pavihi of the Samoan Advisory Council in Dunedin says the measles tragedy is fresh in the mind of Samoans.
Going back to the vaccine in Samoa, in Samoa earlier days in the measles time, to vaccine the children, the people is now aware of the prevention of it's better prevent than cure. So I think they are waiting for that vaccine to come.
Afamasanga says it's difficult to know exactly what's going on with the COVID vaccination campaign and that sharing information through the news isn't enough.
See, it's a lot of our older people are depending on our children. The children will tell the story to them and tell them, oh, you better do it, Dad, because da. But these people here needed to read and understand in their own translation.
New Zealand's government says it's funding Pacific health providers to assist with its vaccination campaign, providers who have the language skills to engage with Pacific communities effectively. For Checkpoint, Johnny Blades.
Undersea robots have journeyed deeper under the ocean floor, collecting data that'll shape our understanding of earthquakes, like the one that prompted mass evacuations earlier this month. The state-of-the-art remote-controlled vehicles have also been exploring areas off New Zealand's coast, never before visited by humans. It's a collaboration between New Zealand and US scientists on board NIWA's research vessel, Tangaroa, which docked in Wellington this morning after weeks at sea. RNZ reporter Hamish Cardwell and cameraman Samuel Rillstone went along to meet the team.
The Hikarangi Fault off the North Island's east coast poses a huge earthquake and tsunami risk. Shakes there and in the Kermadec earlier this month forced tens of thousands to gap it to higher ground after a series of significant shakes caused a tsunami warning. Now, it's hoped scientists can get a better understanding of quakes like that, thanks to data underwater robots have collected from undersea observatories. Dr. Laura Wallace from GNS Science says the data from them is impossible to get on land.
It's really all about trying to understand what this sleeping giant underneath us is doing, which is very hard to do when so much of it is offshore. So you've really got to turn to offshore methods and be collecting data in the offshore region.
The data will give scientists an unprecedented look at the relationship between the shakes we can feel and what's called slow slip earthquakes that can happen over weeks. Dr. Wallace says when the quake struck earlier this month, it was both scary and scientifically thrilling.
So it was simultaneously really stressful for quite a while, but also kind of thinking forward to how cool it's going to be to get that data and to get a little more information on what happened out there.
The project is a collaboration between GNS Science, NIWA and the University of Washington. Washington Uni Associate Professor Evan Solomon says it's been an incredibly difficult project to pull together.
Of course, we couldn't predict that there was going to be a pandemic, and so for the past year it's been a major effort to clear a bunch of hurdles to make sure that this cruise happened and was successful, and it was an incredible amount of work. I've been doing this kind of thing for about 20 years now, and by far this was the most challenging to pull off.
He says the underwater vehicles went as deep as 3.5 kilometres below the surface.
So certainly need lights, and there's a ton of them. There are a variety of cameras that they have. They have a very nice forward-looking camera. There are also other cameras that look at different orientations. These are the manipulators here. So these are the two arms of the ROV. This is what we use to grab stuff and manipulate things on the seafloor. These also have cameras, so you can see what you're grabbing onto.
At that depth, there is absolutely no light. But there is still life. Cold seeps in fault zones are like an oasis in the desert. Microscopic organisms live there, converting methane and other chemicals venting through the seafloor into energy, acting as the base of the food chain for larger animals. NIWA microbial ecologist Sarah Seabrook says the Ropos went to places never before visited by humans, including a seep site off the coast of Kaikoura.
You see crabs, you see sea stars, you see sea cucumbers, and then once you get to the center of the seep, you see specific animals such as these large tuberous bushes, which can be taller than me sometimes. You see clams, you see mussels, you see microbial mats, and you see these huge carbonate platforms, which attract a lot of other animals.
The scientists will now start analysing the data. For Checkpoint, ko Hamish Cardwell aho.
And if you were listening to that story from Hamish and Sam Rillstone, the video will go up on our Facebook page. Some of you getting in touch about managed isolation here. Marie, this is the story about the MIQ hotel, which has had a few problems, and they're currently trying to track down 250 people who recently left. They need them to be tested again for COVID. Marie says, why is it called managed isolation? A more accurate name would be mismanaged mixing. Sue has got in touch to say, hop on a bus to exercise. That's a real risk to take. Just exercise in your room. Only 14 days, says Sue. And that is about a person who had tested positive for COVID, was put back on a bus. The hotel is busing people to an exercise area in a different suburb. Someone else says, who decided to go on these buses to get exercise must accept the risk of being close to others who are potentially infected. And their stay may be reset back to 14 days. They could always stay in their room for 14 days. Should probably point out that some of the guests thought that they were being separated on the buses and only grouped in certain travel bubbles, but that turned out not to be the case, with some people from high-risk areas and others from low-risk countries being put on the bus together. On emergency departments, this person says, I'm a critical care nurse. Last week, my family asked me to stop working for the DHB. We are overworked, stressed, burnt out, and in an unsafe working environment related to a mismatch of demand versus resources. A GP's got in contact to say they're also overloaded. There is chronic underfunding in hospitals for investigations that could reduce admissions. More on this after 6.
RNZ News at 6 ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. A doctor isolating in Auckland's Grand MIQ Hotel says the MIQ facility has botched up. More than 250 returnees who've left the facility since March the 10th are now being ordered to stay home and get a COVID test after a link was found between two people at the hotel with the UK strain of the virus. It's been revealed one of the people who tested positive got their results while out on a walk, but they were still put back on the bus with other returnees to be driven back to the hotel. One of the other returnees on the bus, a doctor, told Checkpoint she is deeply concerned about what she sees as sloppy, dangerous protocols.
It's disappointing. It's a betrayal of trust. And every New Zealander should feel very unhappy about that. I don't know how it's happened. I thought that we were within a bubble, and I thought the risk was stratified, that we would be walked within with people within our zone, our own bubble.
A doctor isolating at the Grand MIQ Hotel. A lawyer representing Peter Ellis in his appeal against 13 child sex convictions has argued it's unfair to admit new evidence he never got a chance to hear. The former Christchurch civic crash worker died in September 2019, but but his appeal is being heard posthumously. The Supreme Court today heard arguments about whether to admit evidence from a new complainant. Ellis's lawyer, Rob Harrison, says the complainant went to police in February 2019 but was told they would not pursue it because Ellis was terminally ill.
There was ample opportunity for them to go and speak to Mr. Ellis and put those allegations to him. My understanding is the file was then sent to Christchurch at that stage, and again, people could have spoken to Mr. Ellis.
Rob Harrison says there are too many inconsistencies in the evidence about when the complainant identified Ellis as the perpetrator. A man accused of threatening to bomb 2 Christchurch mosques on the anniversary of the terror attack is battling to keep his name secret. The 27-year-old is alleged to have posted the threats on the online forum 4chan. He's facing 1 charge of threatening to kill and 7 charges for distributing the Christchurch terrorists' manifesto. Having already entered a not guilty plea last week, the man is now fighting to keep his name secret. Media organisations, including RNZ, oppose continuing the interim name suppression. The Christchurch District Court today adjourned the hearing until July to allow the Defence Counsel time to obtain reports. The Prime Minister is defending the government's plan to remove mortgage interest deductibility on rental properties. It's one of the measures announced this week to tilt the housing market towards first home buyers. However, it's been heavily criticised by property investor groups and some economists. Jacinda Ardern says the government has responded to unsustainable growth in the market.
We knew that there was a tax loophole there that was really encouraging potentially speculative behaviour, and this is our response to that.
Jacinda Ardern says low interest rates will make the transition easier for investors. This week, 2 major hospitals have reached capacity and health workers are warning the situation could get worse. In the past 48 hours, both Dunedin and Whangarei hospitals asked people to keep ED for emergencies only. Dunedin Hospital has since returned to normal, but medical practitioners say they're seeing major problems in emergency health care around the country. The president of the Australasian College of Emergency Medicine, John Bonning, says it's affecting patient care. He says some emergency department shifts have only 2/3 of their normal number of nurses. Australia's Attorney-General Christian Porter is set to be stripped of his role as the Prime Minister grapples with a deepening crisis in his government. Christian Porter has been on leave after revealing himself as the minister at the centre of an historic rape allegation, a claim he strongly denies. The ABC's Matthew Doran reports.
Scott Morrison fuelled speculation about Mr Porter's future as the first law officer of the Commonwealth when he was asked by the opposition leader Anthony Albanese about whether the West Australian would be dumped. The Prime Minister answered that he was considering advice from the Solicitor General about how Mr Porter could continue in the role. Mr Porter has been on medical leave since publicly naming himself as the minister against whom an historical rape allegation had been made. He strongly denies the allegation and has launched a defamation claim against the ABC.
Matthew Doran reporting. Virginia has become the first US southern state to abolish the death penalty. The governor signed a bill to end capital punishment, saying it will stop a machinery of death with a history of racial disparities. Virginia has executed more people than any other US state except Texas since it was upheld by the Supreme Court in 1976. Executions are still allowed across 27 states, although several have a moratorium on carrying out the punishment. It's 5 minutes past 6. New Zealand Rugby is confident sign-off on 2 new Pacific Super Rugby teams is just a few weeks away. World Rugby has committed $7 million over the next 3 years to support the establishment of the Auckland-based Moana Pacifica, a joint Samoa and Tonga syndicate, and the super-based Fijian Drua. The 2 sides are set to join an expanded 12-team competition in 2022, although New Zealand Rugby's Chris Lendrum says while a deal is close, it's not there yet.
They both need capitalisation, essentially money for a rainy day or to invest in infrastructure or other capital needs, and both are making good progress in that regard. We're not quite there yet, and there's a little bit more time before that needs to all be in place.
New Zealand Rugby's Chris Landrum, the Sports Minister, says success on the international sporting stage can't come at the expense of athlete welfare. Athlete welfare is central to a new strategy released today by High Performance Sport New Zealand. Several national sporting organisations have been criticised for their treatment of athletes recently, and the Minister Grant Robertson says the new strategy shows lessons have been learnt with funding will now be contingent on athlete welfare.
The need for change is evident, particularly in the athlete welfare and wellbeing space. We know that there have been a number of reviews into sport, particularly at the high performance level, where wellbeing issues have been highlighted, and I'm delighted that the strategy is taking that seriously.
The Sports Minister, Grant Robertson. That's the news.
Tonight on Night, Space co-founder Emmeline Peart-Dahlstrom looks forward to the 60th anniversary of Yuri Gagarin orbiting the Earth and wonders why we haven't made it much further. Apart from a few trips to the moon, Charlie Cuff presents Tech with a Teenager. This evening he offers advice on cryptocurrency, and our overseas correspondent Silva Tamba is on the line from an e-savvy Estonia on Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Coromandel Peninsula mainly fine. Isolated showers developing today. Auckland to Wellington including Bay of Plenty, Central High Country and Wairatapa. Mainly fine. Isolated showers developing later tomorrow about and north of Taihape. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay cloudy with 1 or 2 showers clearing to fine tomorrow. Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough increasing fine spells. Isolated showers about the ranges tonight. Westland and Fiordland cloud increasing this evening, a few showers tomorrow. Canterbury and coastal Otago, areas of low cloud, mainly evening and morning, otherwise fine. For the remainder of Otago and Southland, fine weather, high cloud increasing tomorrow. Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy tonight with the odd shower, fine spells increasing tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Hospital emergency departments around the country are heaving and it's not even winter. In the past 48 hours, Dunedin Hospital and Whangarei Hospital reached capacity and were forced to ask people to keep ED for emergencies only. In some areas, patients have been treated in corridors and forced to wait for several hours for a bed, while some staff are burning out, stretching resources even further. Health Minister Andrew Little joins me now. Kia ora, Minister.
Kia ora, Lisa.
Dr. John Bonning, he knows his stuff when it comes to emergency medicine. Would you agree?
I don't know John Bonning, and I haven't read any interview by him. I'm driven by information and facts.
Yeah, okay. Well, he's presenting...
We're fine.
Yep, he's presenting some information and facts. He says, in some cases, 2/3 the normal staff numbers in EDs, that there are poorer outcomes for patients who have to wait longer, that they're seriously under pressure, busiest couple of months on record, January and February. He describes it as a crisis. How do you see it?
I've seen some figures. I saw that December was a particularly for a peak of activity in EDs. When I look at the figures across all DHBs across the last year or so, the figures are reasonably consistent. I think there's a number of things going on here. One is that it's not just what happens in EDs, it's what happens in the rest of the hospital, each hospital as well, and the way patients in the rest of the hospitals are managed. We know that when it comes to staffing, look, we've funded a considerable growth in staff numbers. Last year alone, additional funding provided 3,000 full-time equivalents across the hospital system. We know that in some EDs, their personnel in the emergency department has gone up reasonably significantly in the last 3 years as well. So I guess what I'm focused on is what are the actions that means that the additional resources that have gone into the hospitals, particularly the emergency departments, means that we're still seeing these crises that these professionals talk about.
So do you think that, hospitals are mismanaging the extra resources?
Well, I haven't said mismanaging. I'm curious to know how it is that when we add a significant number of additional personnel, full-time equivalents to our hospital, and of course, I talked about 3,000 full-time equivalents last year. The year before that, it was roughly 2,000, and before that, again, another 2,000. So we're adding quite a few additional personnel. I know that some hospitals, DHBs, are struggling to fill vacancies, and that's why we put extra money into training, particularly for nurses and for emergency departments. We've got 223 people training for emergency department specialisms. So we put that at that end as well. So I kind of want to know what management decisions are being taken to make sure that they're getting the best use out of the additional personnel who are being funded.
Could it be as simple as this, Minister, that despite the fact that you are adding resources, the need is still outstripping those resources?
Well, from what the health professionals you're talking about, including John Bonner, are saying, that's what they're observing, that's what they're seeing, that's what they talk about. And look, at the emergency department level, that clearly is the case on occasions. I guess what I want to know is, in terms of defining the problem, is it just at the emergency department level? Is it elsewhere in each individual hospital? What is the problem? That I've asked the ministry for assistance on that. I've spoken to the chair of the Southern DHB this afternoon, Pete Hodgson, to get them to make sure they're focusing on what was the cause of the situation they're facing.
When are you expecting the ministry to get back to you on that, Minister?
Well, as soon as possible.
And when did you ask for that information from them?
Today.
Okay. Had you heard about this before today?
I've seen some information about pressure on emergency departments in other areas. Nothing. I've never seen a code black being called before of the nature that seems to be the case in the Southern DHB. I saw a story yesterday coming out of Canterbury DHB about pressures that they're under. I know from I've been talking to a lot of the stakeholder groups, and GPs and others are talking about the pressures that they are under. But in terms of the kind of the story that certainly came out of Dunedin today, obviously that concerns me. I want to understand the full nature of the problem.
GPs have also got in touch, and also emergency doctors are telling us this as well, that GPs are overloaded, right? And that means sometimes there's the flow-on effect. If people can't get into their doctor, they turn up at the emergency department. Could the resources need to be, lower down, nearer the start of the food chain?
Oh, I think that's totally right. And I think, one of the issues we know, and I think it probably is the case in Dunedin, that actually not so much Dunedin, much more in Invercargill, which is a part of the Southern DHB area, is that the number of doctors there and the number of GP surgeries that are available, particularly after hours, has been heavily diminished. And so that's seeing more people turn up to emergency departments. We know that there is a shortage of GPs across the country. The GP organisations have told me that. I accept that. We've put additional support into training GPs. I know that, and part of the relaxation of some of the border restrictions we've got on at the moment is specifically focused at getting health professionals across the border so we can fill some of the gaps that are there. So we're doing everything we can in the time that we've got to try and fix those problems.
We're still basically in, good weather months, right? And the concern is that as we go into winter, this problem could get worse. So related to that, have we got flu vaccines in the country? Are we ready to go with that immunisation program?
That program kicks off in the middle of next month. The vaccine provider was unable to have them available for the 1st of April, which is the typical start date for it. So that'll be pushed out. And we've had to make some decisions too about managing that as against the COVID-19 vaccination rollout as well. So steps are being taken to make sure that those who are reliant on their flu vaccinations to get through the winter, older people, seniors, but others who've got health conditions that make them more vulnerable, that the flu vaccination will be available. We'll make sure that part of the campaign.
So 1st of April was supposed to be the start date. What is it now?
The 14th of April.
Okay, because we've also had reports in Auckland that some people have been turned away, checking up on their flu vaccinations because they said there was a shortage of needles. Do you know anything about that?
Haven't heard of that.
Okay. So you're meeting tomorrow with some people who work in this area, emergency medicine. What can you offer in terms of assistance?
Well, I think it's about sharing the data to see what we've got and together to analyse the problem. I mean, I probably won't have the information from the Southern DHB about their particular problem tomorrow, but I think it's about talking through not just the effects but the causes of it and work out what more it is that can or needs to be done.
I know it's not always about money and extra resources, but do you have money and extra resources that you can put to this if it's needed?
We're in a process at the moment, so that's well underway. I can't talk about that. But I know in last year's budget we put a record amount into additional operational funding for our DHBs, $980 million a year extra, because they've been having deficits and all that sort of stuff. But that's money that goes in to increase the staff complement to meet those needs. Look, we all know that health, providing health treatment and health services is getting more complex. We have an ageing population. We have a population with increasingly complex health needs, and so we have to have health services to match, and there's going to be extra cost for that. But I think we also need to make sure that the way we manage the system as a whole, and this goes to the heart of kind of one of the objectives of the reforms, is that we're getting consistency and coherence across the system. That if one hospital is constrained because of resources, that if there's a way that we can find space or use resources from another hospital reasonably nearby, that we're doing that as well. That is very hard into the current system.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is the Health Minister there, Andrew Little. It is almost 17 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. There were fiery clashes at Parliament today as the mongrel mob gave a submission on a proposed firearms control law. MPs are mulling National MP Simeon Brown's bill, which seeks to give police powers to ensure gang members don't have guns. Waikato Mongrel Mob Kingdom Public Relations Advisor Louise Hutchinson had heated exchanges with MPs as she told them the bill is racist dog whistle politics. Political reporter Yvette McCullough was there.
Louise Hutchinson did not hold back in her lengthy explanation of why the Waikato Mongrel Mob Kingdom opposed this bill.
And we believe without doubt that this was a politically motivated bill purely to gain votes and continue the National Party and right-wing political parties' agendas of getting tough on gangs. There is no doubt that this bill is racist in its intent.
She told MPs that her chapter, led by Sani Fatupaito, is proof that the stereotype that all gang members are criminals is wrong.
There has been a turn of the tide in the Waikato Mongrel Mob Kingdom. We are the least incarcerated chapter in New Zealand. We have zero suicide, 0 homicides. We have educational and awareness programs.
She said rather than focusing on things like firearms prohibition orders, politicians should be addressing the drivers of crime like poverty. But Simeon Brown clearly found all this hard to swallow.
Why am I reading in the papers that your members are still selling meth? Because I can listen to everything you've said, which is about how you're changing, but until you stop selling meth to the community across New Zealand and you hand in your guns, I'm not going to believe it.
Don't believe what the media puts out there.
This is the police.
No.
The police.
You can't put up the proof, Simeon, of where that we have guns.
So 29 members were arrested last year.
No, that's not even us.
National MP Simon Bridges grilled her on Mr Fatupaito reportedly saying his members wouldn't be handing back guns.
Why should we take anything you say seriously?
Because what you're saying is
he doesn't take the laws of this land seriously.
What you're saying is actually incorrect.
Well, it's what the media reported. Are they making it up?
Is this a PR stunt for you, Simon?
No. I'm asking you, because you've come along and you've sought to give us straight talk, give us some on this. You must be aware if you know anything about this,
Simon? Where's your proof?
Sani Fatu, your leader, saying it.
There was a mainstream media report. If the police had proof that there are guns in our organisation, do you not think people would have been arrested by now?
National MP Nick Smith challenged Ms Hutchinson's assertion that firearms prohibition orders were racially motivated.
Could it not be that actually gangs have a higher level of serious, violent offending? You couldn't be blind to the harm that is done from gangs peddling it. And all the stats show that criminal gang members have the highest propensity for such violence and harmful crime in New Zealand.
ACT MP Nicole McKee said there was clear evidence that gang gun violence was escalating.
What Waikato Mongrel Mob are doing sounds exceptional. Your challenge is to go out there and get the other gangs to do that, because we only had one gang member hand in a firearm during the buyback.
Ms Hutchinson said that was her leader's life mission, but there were many barriers to being able to achieve this. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
A giant container ship the length of 4 rugby fields remains wedged in Egypt's Suez Canal, blocking one of the world's busiest trade routes. 8 tugboats and diggers are working to refloat the ship, called the Ever Given, but it's feared the blockage will last for several days. It has, however, sent oil prices climbing, as the BBC's Richard Galpin reports.
One of the world's biggest container ships blocking the Suez Canal, one of the world's most vital trade routes. The ship, operated by a Taiwanese company, Evergreen, heading north through the canal towards the Mediterranean when it lost all power and steering. So what are the reasons for this?
One of them is engine failure. You lose control due to engine failure. You would lose control due to a steering failure, or you would lose control, which appears to be the case here, because they have experienced high winds.
Other large ships and oil and gas containers arrive in the area, but can go no further. The position of Ever Given totally blocking the route. The 200,000-ton ship has now been stuck for 2 days. The ship's technical managers have ruled out any mechanical or engine failures as a cause of this incident. Work to refloat it continues, but so far has not been successful.
It's an unusual situation, and it's a very dire one. This is the largest vessel ever to go ground in the Suez Canal, and she's gone sideways in the canal, blocking both north and south passage. It could have huge ramifications for global trade, especially between Asia and Europe.
Normally, 50 ships a day pass through the Suez Canal, providing up to 12% of world trade. The main alternative for ships travelling between Asia and Europe is around Africa, but this is a much longer route.
Richard Galpin with that report. As the call for a government apology for New Zealand's dawn raids of the 1970s gathers momentum, the desire for meaningful reparations does too. The Polynesian Panthers' social justice movement has called for both, but what shape or form they could take are yet to be determined. Dominic Godfrey has been talking to some who have ideas.
The Polynesian Panthers called for an apology for the dawn raids as part of their 50th anniversary. One of the original members, Dr. Melania Nai, says they met with the Ministry for Pacific Peoples last month,
where it was agreed that the Polynesian Panther Party has statistical, moral and racial grounds for seeking an apology because of the plethora of books, articles, statements, documentaries that we have which tell us the story about the dawn raids and the Polynesian Panthers.
Dr. Anai says they're also talking about reparations to accompany an apology, but nothing's been confirmed.
We are working with the ministry to the best of both of our capabilities to have a positive outcome about the apology.
For many Pacific people, the legacy of the dawn raids is visceral and has been left to fester. A former Race Relations Commissioner, Joris de Bres, who was Secretary of the Citizens Association for Racial Equality, CARE, during the dawn raids era, says an apology would be significant.
Because this has been a pain, a sore, that is still felt in the Pacific community. And I guess a whole new generation of people are learning about that. But I know that the older Pacific community still have this in their hearts, and it's a very heavy burden.
The Green Party MP and Pacific People's spokesperson, Te Ano Tuiono, says an apology's long overdue, but people have to understand exactly what it's for. Ensuring the story of the dawn raids and the Polynesian Panthers is taught in schools would be an important part of that. He says learning from history also helps to ensure exploitation doesn't continue, and he cites the treatment of Pacific seasonal horticultural workers.
With RSE workers as well, knowing that we still have issues with overstayers. So I'm also supportive of having pathways for residencies for overstayers. And in this context, I'm thinking of our Pasifika overstayers as well.
A former Minister for Pacific Peoples, Lua Manuvau Dame Winnie Laban, who lived through the dawn raids, says an apology's important, but it's action that gives it substance. She wants New Zealand to look at what more it can do for its Pacific neighbours.
New Zealand trades $1.9 billion to the region, and the return is minuscule. Schemes like RSE are important because why? Our people come and work here, they send money back home, and they can contribute to building houses, starting their own businesses, and also to see the economies thrive in the islands in which they come from.
She says helping the islands re-gear their economies will help them retain their skilled youth, who they lose to Australia and New Zealand. For Pacific people here, she wants a commitment to lifting education, health and employment levels, and says that would give real meaning to any apology. Mo te hotaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Dominic Godfrey tēnei.
The Prime Minister left the Cabinet Papers in the van today to play conductor on a new commuter train service linking the Waikato and Auckland. Jacinda Ardern and Transport Minister Michael Wood, along with other local politicians, officially launched the new $90 million train service in Hamilton this afternoon. Our reporter Riley Kennedy went along and filed this report.
The wheels are now turning on a service the Prime Minister hopes will be handy for her in the future.
One day, I hope that I can safely put Neve Tiaraha on Te Huia to travel from Auckland to visit her grandparents.
The new commuter train, named Te Huia after the extinct native bird, was officially launched by her and the Transport Minister Michael Wood today. The 12-carriage train will zip between Hamilton and South Auckland twice a day, dropping passengers off at a number of stops on its 90-minute journey. Jacinda Ardern says the service will benefit Hamilton and the wider Waikato economies.
I mean, we're already seeing huge growth in this city, and you are starting to see it in the areas where this train will be able to service. So absolutely, part of the reason we wanted to support a project like that is because of the growth that we're seeing in the city, and also the fact that people are choosing to commute between the two.
It's been a long time coming, and Waikato Regional Council Chair Russ Remington says it is appalling successive governments didn't support the project.
And it is only with a vision of the people standing before us today that this historic forward step has been achieved.
Mr Remington reckons the Waikato region is about to enter an exciting new era of public transport.
And in many ways a renaissance, with the integration of the transport hubs with rail, buses to ride-share vehicles. It is in less than 5 years, electric vehicles will outnumber combustion vehicles in the park and ride facilities in the spaces here today.
3 new locomotives and 12 carriages have been refurbished for the service, which has created 51 new jobs. Kiwi Rail's Chief Executive Greg Miller calls the refurbishment world class.
New seats, new tables, new toilets, new windows, new technology, and with wheelchair accessibility in the cafe car. Each carriage effectively has its own data stream service, which will mean good quality, high-speed Wi-Fi, allowing passengers to work to and from the cities they're travelling from.
But Hamilton Mayor Paula Southgate says people will need to get on board with it to avoid it becoming a ghost train.
We need community support. We're out there testing that right now, so we hope the community will really get behind this. And 2, we need Waka Kotahi to come on board and invest in our move towards other modes of transportation.
It's estimated Te Huia will take about 73,000 return car trips to Auckland off the road. The first service will chug away from the station on April the 6th. In Hamilton for Checkpoint, Riley Kennedy.
And time for some of your feedback. A bunch of you getting in touch about emergency departments. We'll get to that. On MIQ, this person says no more bus to park for exercise. Star jumps in your room. Much safer. On our overrun emergency departments, a GP's got in touch saying I'm fully booked a week in advance and will try to squeeze acute cases in when I can. But I can't be in 3 places at once if the numbers get too much. A Hawke's Bay GP says the Health Minister needs to treat GPs as the specialists we are, and allowed us to order better tests through the DHB. Echo CT outpatient clinics are blowing out. Extra funding doesn't come to us. Someone else says with 3-week waits for appointments at some general practices in Northland, ED is going to become overloaded. Added to that, only 3 practices are enrolling new patients. Someone else says I'm a nursing graduate, still no job with the DHB here in Wellington. In fact, there were only 69 vacancies for the whole region. What is the Minister talking about? 3,000 extra roles. Now, don't forget our stories go up online. Go have a look at the Mapura art therapy story from the 2 Nicks and Bridget. It's on our Facebook page. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A doctor isolating in Auckland's Grand MIQ hotel has told Checkpoint she's worried about the facility's sloppy, dangerous protocols. More than 250 returnees who've left the hotel in the past 2 weeks have been ordered to stay home and get tested due to fears of transmission within the hotel. A lawyer representing Peter Ellis in his posthumous appeal against child sex convictions argues it's unfair to admit new evidence he never got a chance to hear.